Ek is hier in die persoonlike woning van Dr. Leila Fourie. Sy is die uitvoerende hoof van die JSE. Nou, Leila het 2 jaar gelede 'n baie hoë pos opgegee by die Commonwealth Bank van Australië om weer terug te kom Suid-Afrika toe en om haar kundigheid en vaardigheid hier te kom gebruik en met mense te deel. Ek sien baie uit daarna om te hoor wat Leila vandag vir ons gaan vertel oor haar werk, maar ook oor haar persoonlike lewe as 'n baie krangige en baie aktiewe atleet.
Well, my name is Leila Fourie and I'm the Group CEO of the Johannesburgse Stock Exchange. I'm an avid cyclist and a rock climber, and I highly energetic, and I do as much in the waking hours as I can to keep myself healthy, engaged, and build relationships with people.
So Leila, I think we should start at the beginning. Please tell us a bit more about your upbringing and childhood.
I am one of actually 10 children, 5 on my mom's side and 4 on my real father's side. I grew up in a very big family, as you can imagine, and I learned to compromise when I was growing up, because you can't always have your way and you can't always have your space when there are 5 of you in a very small home. I grew up in humble beginnings. My father, who adopted me, was very focused on looking after us and caring for us, but we didn't have a lot of money, and so I had to pay for my university fees when I went to university, and in fact my pastor helped me out in my second year a little bit and he gave me 1,000 rand, which in those days was a lot of money, and it paid for about 2/3 of my tuition fees. And when I was appointed to the board of the JSE prior to becoming the CEO, I looked him up and I went back, and I was going through a difficult time, and my somebody who's much wiser than me had said, if you're going through a tough time, give back to others and it'll really heal you. And I took the money back to him with compound interest and a bit more. And at that point in his life, he had been going through a tremendously difficult period. And I remember him crying deeply when I engaged with him and his wife. He was an old man at the time, and or older. And it was a very emotional time for me, because it reinforced what my childhood had taught me, which is look after people and pay it forward and never forget your roots. And so I grew up on what people would say is the wrong side of the tracks. So I didn't go to a private school. And when I was at working, particularly in the banking environment, I felt quite embarrassed that when people, the first thing they ask you when they introduce themselves is, what school did you go to? And I wasn't part of the old school tie elite. And now I'm actually quite proud that I went to Florida Park High, and that I grew up with a normal, in a normal environment, and I didn't grow up in a curated, wealthy, exclusive environment. And it's really taught me basic values that have helped me through my leadership journey.
Sure. What an incredible story. I never knew that. So,
yes.
Yeah. I know you don't think so, but you speak really well Afrikaans. So, where does that
My Afrikaans is eintlik nie te vlot nie, maar I went to to Rau, and the reason I went to Rau, my Afrikaans was pretty average at school, and the reason I went to Rau was because I got a bit of a leadership bursary from being head girl at the school, at my high school. And it was a rather terrifying experience, because I learned Afrikaans very quickly, and I used to translate my lectures, which were in Afrikaans, into English because I could only think in English. And so that really worked well, but my voorsetsels are always wrong. And if you don't practice it, you don't develop it. But it's a wonderful language, and it's a language that is so much more expressive than English. So things like, I always use the word Deursettingsvermoë, because there's no English word that truly translates and carries the same meaning. And it's a very important leadership concept for me, and a concept in my sporting life.
You fill the mighty position as the CEO of the JSE. Don't you want to tell us a bit more about your job and what it all entails?
My job is a great privilege, and in fact, the reason that I came back from Australia to take up the role was, firstly, I wanted to give back to the country of my birth, and secondly, I didn't want to get to 70 and wonder, should I, could I, would I, should I have come? And in hindsight now, 2 years later, I can say the role has been everything I expected and more. It opens doors to use your position to give back and to improve the lives of people around you. And so you would have seen that I've advocated very strongly on things like sustainable development, on equality, on gender positioning. And aside from the commercial aspect and the fact that you are pretty much very involved in the economy and the financial markets, I feel very privileged that I'm able to, through my role, translate our activities into really uplifting people around us. And that for me is the most important. I think as you get older, you realize that basic values are the most important thing. And I think if I look back over the last 2 years, 18 months of my 2 years have been leading through the crisis. And that has created the importance of reversion to basic values. And the things that you think matter when you're young and building your career are profoundly different when you have a few years under your belt. And so that has been a very important part of my role at the JSE.
Well, I think people should know you gave up a really great job in Australia. And I know everybody said, yeah, but how could you leave Australia for South Africa? I mean, it sounds crazy. And also you've got a tremendous stressful job. So.
Yeah, and in fact, when I accepted the role and it was announced on SENS, I was quite troubled that I had an absolute flood of messages on LinkedIn and on my WhatsApp with South Africans asking me what on earth I was thinking to come back to the country. And I have to say, I love Australia. It's a beautiful country, and I was very, very happy. So it really was a difficult decision because my kids are still in Australia. They're older and they've got their own lives now. But I think we can be congenitally negative about our country, and we don't appreciate the beauty of the country, the natural beauty and the vibrance and the energy of the people. And those are things that really uplift me. When I got off the plane and I was going down the escalator, somebody came down and he said, "How's it? Shup, shup." And I just thought, I feel like I'm home. And it's those little anecdotes and those really warm interactions that make South Africa a great place to be.
Yes, I'm sure there's many challenges every day. I know the JSE went through a huge crisis a while back, but how do you handle these crises and stress?
Well, actually, I think I tend to thrive in a crisis. And if we look back over the pandemic, we were facing into an enormous crisis. Can you imagine 3 years ago telling people that you were going to run the stock exchange from home, and all the traders who are basing their trading positions on latency and on getting their trades in fast, that you would do that from your home, and that not only would you be working from home, but that we would process the highest volumes in the history of the JSE. It was quite an extraordinary out-of-body experience, and I think managing through a crisis brings you back to the basics, and you become reliant on the people around you, and your perspective, your outlook has to be positive, but it has to be balanced. You have to lead with conviction, and your judgment is critical. You have to be able to deal with the immediate crisis in front of you, but still taking account of the long range of vision that you're looking into in what will this mean for us in 5 years from now. And there was that constant, during the pandemic and the crisis, managing through that period, there was a constant balancing factor. I'm very grateful for the leaders that I'm surrounded by. My ExCo is a phenomenal group of very intelligent and advanced leaders, and without them, we would never have been successful. So I think leadership during a crisis is about making sure that you associate with everybody and you understand things from their position, and that you empower them to do what they're hired to do, which is make decisions and lead.
Yes, I want to talk about leadership and the qualities of a good leader.
My leadership character right now is a function of many of my experiences. Someone much wiser than me told me about this concept called Kairos experience, and that is the experience that you have which lasts forever. And all of my interactions, as I look back through my leadership roles that I've had, have built my DNA into who I am now. And I think those experiences they structure your spiritual and leadership personality. And I would say that the things that I've learned not only from the leaders, but particularly from my upbringing. My grandmother and my mother taught me about determination, Deursettingsvermoë. And that has really stood me in good stead, both when I do rock climbing and cycling with you, and also in the workplace. They also taught me about the importance of forgiveness. And that's a value system that I've brought into the workplace. And often the JSE is the lightning rod of what goes on in the economy. And there can be sharp comments that come through. And you have to learn to forgive people and realize that their perspective is not the same as your perspective, and that has been a vitally important part of my interaction and building lasting relationships. And then the final point I'd say that I've learned both from my mom and my grand, but also from an icon that I respect, is curiosity, intellectual curiosity, and the energy to learn more and to grow and develop. And leaders have to constantly be learning new skills. They've got to learn new ways of doing things, and they have to become more creative. And if they don't have that hunger inside of them, it's very difficult to keep pace with what's going on in the world. And so those are the three things: Deursettingsvermoë, curiosity, and creativity, and the desire to learn, and forgiveness are the things that have been important in my leadership journey. Of course, they're different for everybody, but at this point in time, my kairos and those moments that have stayed with me forever have really molded those three characteristics.
Leila, I would love to talk about the things you do when you're not working. I know you love mountain climbing and cycling, but yeah, what do you do in your free time, or if there's any?
Well, I have a really active life, and so I'm a little bit unorthodox in that I do a lot of rock climbing and mountaineering. When I try and get down to Cape Town as often as I can and climb various mountains, including Table Mountain. And then I also cycle a lot. I cycle with a charity group called Change a Life, which I'm very committed to, and the JSE is very committed to. And I also spend a lot of time with friends and family. My children are overseas, so a lot of it is screen time. I was cycling this morning, actually, before you got here, and had video calls with my kids while I was cycling on Zwift.
Then you're not working hard enough, eh?
Exactly. That's when I start falling back, and my cycling friends say, "Trap, Leila, trap. You're doing too much admin." And I play a little bit of piano and do online chess and that sort of thing, but cycling and climbing are probably my big exciting
Leila, but
thing.
I've seen some of the pictures on your Facebook of the stuff you do. You say a little bit of rock climbing, but just looking at the pictures is like I go into angst. So, yeah, tell us about that and the expeditions you've done before.
Well, I've been very, very lucky to do a lot of really exciting expeditions all over the world, in Russia, in the Himalayas, in South America, in New Zealand, and Australia. I think probably the most interesting one for me was climbing the highest mountain in Antarctica, which was Mount Vinson. And I had a really interesting experience because I was 50 years old when I did that 3 years ago, and I didn't know at the time that I have had asthma all of my life. And I got sick at the base camp. And Antarctica is a very interesting continent because it has 70% of the world's fresh water and 90% of its ice, but yet it's a desert. And so that very dry environment had created a bit of an allergy in my chest. And my guide said to me, all you have to do is maintain your illness. Just don't let it get worse. You can't get better because you're at altitude. And I hadn't thought of that dynamic. And when you're climbing, you have sort of 30 kilograms on your back, and half of it is in your backpack and half of it is in a sled and that you're pulling. And so I remember sitting at base camp, drinking hot water with salts and vitamins in it, and just watching the guys going up an incredibly steep part to get to the camp just before you summit. And that day, I had a really bad day, and I was watching the guys just moving out of my sight. And I was feeling like I was getting left behind because I was the only woman in the entire camp. And what happened on the day that we summited was that I was coughing really badly. The night before, I sat down with everybody and said, look, how do you feel? Do you want me to hold back or do you want me to try? And they were all unanimously wanting me to go. And I said to my guide, am I okay to go? He did my tests, checked my oxygen, and I was okay. I wasn't in a great space, but I felt okay. So I said to them, if there is no wind tomorrow, then, or if the wind is low, because it's the windiest continent in the world, and you normally summit at, sort of 20 to 40 knots per hour, which is really heavy. A tent has been lifted up with a man in it in the week before I'd got there. So we decided if there was no wind, I was going to go. And when we woke up, it was a clear day. We got to the first watering hole, and one of the four people who were summiting decided he wasn't feeling like he could do it. So he turned back, and everybody turned to me and said, Leila, what are you going to do? And in a moment, I just decided I'm going to summit this. And so the guide took him back, and when he got back to the watering hole, I suddenly thought, what have I done? I really should have turned back. I can't turn back now. And I felt like I couldn't breathe. I was really struggling because we summited at minus 37 degrees centigrade. So you've got lots of layers on you. So when you start, you're really hot. Anyhow, I managed to get up and I managed to summit, but it was really an interesting test of my Deursettingsvermoë. And it's a funny thing that when you're on a mountain, the altitude moderates you. And people who are very strong and fit, I was by far the weakest because the others were guys and very strong athletes. but yet the altitude tended to moderate us, and suddenly I felt I had my second wind and I felt brilliant going up to that last little bit. And so there are just so many things that I've learnt and so many wonderful lessons that I've taken from that experience and many other of the experiences that I've been very fortunate to experience.
Would you compare rock climbing with being the CEO of the JSE?
There's no question, there are such strong analogies. And in fact, I've learned so much, particularly through technical rock climbing, that apply back to leadership. I've learned about tactics and pre-planning your moves, and I've learned about commitment and backing yourself. When you are, there is a move called a dyno. It's a dynamic move, and basically you're lurching up to reach a handhold that is out of reach, and you have to use your momentum. And when you're against the rock and you see that handhold that is completely out of your reach, you have to commit, because if you don't commit your whole body and you hesitate, you are going to fall and you'll never make it. And so that commitment and that follow through and that backing yourself is such an important part in leadership, and particularly for women, because we tend to doubt ourselves, we tend to hesitate and pull back, and maybe some of us don't even try that move in the workplace. And that has been probably one of the most important messages or lessons that I've applied in my everyday life.
Leila, just to finish off, I want to talk about the future of South Africa. How do you feel? Are you scared? Because I know everybody's scared and unsure at the moment. We don't know what's going to happen. How do you feel about our country?
There is so much interesting research that's done around fear, and people tend to overreact to fear and underreact to potential gain. And I have to disclose that I'm an undiluted optimist, and so I am biased. But I would never have come back to the country had I thought that there was no future. And South Africa is like a cat. It always lands on its feet. And it's quite mercurial that we always think we're on the brink. The sky is about to fall on our heads. Then suddenly something happens. And we've had that time and time again through the history of the country. And we are a much more pioneering, much more entrepreneurial nation than we give ourselves credit for. And so there are a lot of really good things in the macroeconomy and in the DNA of the people. Particularly, I think the work that's been done around corruption by the president is very promising. The incarceration of leaders, the step-aside rule, the work that's being done to make sure that there are qualified people in those organs of state. I think the work being done around electricity reform and potentially bringing in green energy. I've just actually literally before this discussion got off a call with government officials around what we're doing around climate change. And I think there is genuine possibility for us to transform what to many men in the street who have their lights switched off through load shedding might not feel is a feasible or possible outcome. And I also think that there is a resurgence of small and medium enterprises for various reasons, and I think that's going to be the growth node of this country, and that's the backbone on which we are likely to grow the economy through SMEs and through infrastructure. But we have to maintain a positive attitude, we have to maintain business confidence, we have to be confident as consumers, and it's that mentality that will get us through. And having been out of the country and now coming back, I've seen how many other countries have a very positive attitude under very trying circumstances. And so I am hopeful that we do have a bright future, and we just have to believe and partner and work together in building particularly those small and medium enterprises.
Nuuspod, onbevange, onbegrens, onbevooroordeeld.